John Hodge joins us live from rural Manitoba, buddy. How you been keeping during the COVID-19 pandemic?
I've been okay. I've decided I'm doing the full hibernation beard. I'm not cutting it until we are allowed out of the house again. So it'll be fun to see how long this thing goes on and how long this thing grows on.
What's the longest you've ever had it?
Not much past this. I've shaped it a little better, I think, right now than I have in the past. But another maybe month, and I'll reach a new all-time high. So that'll be fun to see how it looks.
Well, we hope you're safe and healthy out there. And to everyone checking this out, the same sentiment goes to you. But the news never stops in the Canadian Football League and around Canadian football in general, Hodge. We had a major story happen with the XFL suspending operations. Was it a surprise to you?
I don't think it was, just given the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic is so widespread and has thrown, not just professional football, but realistically every industry outside of a very scant few into a complete unprecedented time, right? We're seeing businesses of all kinds reaching out for help. And, if you could have picked a worse time to start up a spring football league, I'm not sure you could have done it. I do feel bad in part, if you read the biography about the late great Bob Ackles, the water boy. He worked in the XFL, the original XFL, back in the very early 2000s, and he had nothing but complimentary things to say about Vince McMahon. Said that everybody got paid, so that everybody was treated with respect, and for them to come out strong. Because things looked good for the XFL for the first little bit. They had strong television numbers. Attendance wasn't bad by any stretch when the season started. It is a shame that, of course, in the world of professional football, there are a lot of great players, coaches, personnel people out looking for work at a time when work is not going to be easy to come by, with the upcoming CFL and NFL seasons also potentially in question as we move forward.
Commissioner Oliver Luck had said that all players were going to be paid their full contracts through the end of the season, which was going to be March, essentially. But now we turn to, all right, who are some of the people that performed well in the XFL, or maybe names like S.J. Green or Monty Edwards and Derek Dennis that went down there and are looking to come back north of the border? Hodge, who could you see legitimately signing in the CFL from the XFL, whether they're related or have played up here or not?
The number one signing that I'm looking for is Sergio Castillo, returning from the Houston Roughnecks to play in the CFL, likely for the BC Lions, where he played last year. Castillo was excellent for BC in 2019. He's one of the few players who can do all three jobs. He's a place kicker, he's a punter, he can do kickoffs, and he played great for them last year. He left to go play for his hometown team in the XFL. And of course, June Jones was there as well. Lots of CFL ties with that club. But I fully expect him to be back in the CFL. The other one, Dunkster, is a player who you wrote about this week, and Connor Cook, former mid-round NFL selection of the Oakland Raiders, who I understand is talking with the Toronto Argonauts.
That's right. The Argos trying to recruit Cook. And you mentioned June Jones there. Jones took him second overall in the XFL draft. It was a tight competition there with PJ Walker, who was on the Ottawa Redblacks neg list. Walker balls out, gets an NFL deal, but Cook, it seems like, could be headed north. The one I might be most intrigued about, just because of his CFL resume, is S.J. Green. Has the obvious link to Scott Milanovic, who's now the head coach of the Edmonton Eskimos. And a lot of people will say Jim Popp, who actually gave Brock Sunderland his first job ever scouting in the CFL, that he's had a lot of influence there in what the Eskimos have done in the offseason. They have signed a number of former Argos that were on Pop's teams there. So when you line up all of those connections, it would make sense that the Eskimos at least look to try to find a way to bring Green in. DeVaris Daniels went to Toronto, got paid by the Argos about $200,000 in free agency. So maybe they have some money to spend at the receiver position and bring in a big body like Green. All right, man. Well, let's keep it moving then, because we had a massive story at 3DownNation that was not only read all across Canada, but North America and probably even the world, to be quite honest. We look at some of our metrics. Line 16 in CFL contracts, Hodge, could create a fantasy world, potentially. What did you think of it when you first heard the news?
I mean, when I first looked into the mock contract that I have on file, a draft of a CFL contract, and I took a look at it, yeah, the wording is a bit shocking. It speaks to what were to happen if the CFL were to suspend operations permanently, essentially. And I think the reason that's in there, as you wrote in your article, is simply to protect teams in case the CFL were to go under, were it to fold, which fortunately I don't think is in the cards. It's not 1997. The CFL is doing quite well for itself in not all, but plenty of markets, particularly on the prairies, Southern Ontario and Hamilton, things going well in Ottawa. But it's to protect teams, essentially. If the league were to fold, they're no longer required to pay players based on what their contracts say. Now, I don't necessarily think that it's in the best interest of the league, or even the Players Association, to be quite honest, to simply have all contracts torn up in the case that the 2020 season doesn't happen. The other thing that you could argue from a legal standpoint, of course, is that if teams are still working, if they're able to sign players, cut players, make trades all the way through 2020, that the league hasn't suspended operations. Operations are as normal, even if the games aren't actually being played. Though there could be some players, and we've seen this in the past with, whether it's Nate Hawley, the league's reigning most outstanding rookie, being the most recent example, of guys who want to get out of their CFL deals, and this could be an opportunity for them to do so.
It would be a perfect time for Nate Hawley to get out of that deal, and it seems like he has a number of NFL suitors and could likely sign a contract down south. Overall, Hodge, I just feel like there was a lot of people out there that maybe didn't even know the clause existed. Michael Pinball Clemens was on Sportsnet Radio, the Fan 590 in Toronto, and admitted as much. So it just shows you that everyone sort of says a cliche line, you got to read the fine print before you buy something or sign a contract. Well, the fact that front office people didn't actually know shows me that, sometimes some of those steps get skipped, which is sort of surprising considering the jobs of a lot of these guys in front offices are to make sure that every I is dotted and T's are crossed. So I'm not saying it was a surprise to everyone, but there were definitely people that were freaking out at the possibility of it. And I do believe that it could be a power play for the players to use. Let's say we do end up having some sort of football played in 2020 in the CFL. Let's say, for example, it's an 8-game season. The players could use that as a chip with the league, potentially even down the line, to say, hey, if we're going to play football this year, we need our salaries to be higher. Otherwise, we're all going to go to court and try to invoke this clause, and we'll be free agents, which would throw it just complete chaos in the CFL.
And there are lots of contracts, realistically, any contract that's currently active that will have that regardless of when the CFL and the CFLPA choose to do their next round of negotiations. The current CBA is only signed through 2021. We, of course, just went through a labor battle. There's going to be another one in essentially 2 years. And there are a number of players in the league, including guys like David Beard in Edmonton, Bo Levi Mitchell in Calgary, Zach Evans in Saskatchewan, who are signed beyond that. Now, again, I don't think it's in the best interest of the PA for everyone to suddenly hit the free agency line. But as you said, Dunk, I do think it's a great tool that they can potentially use to gain some leverage, because let's be honest, it's hard in labor negotiations for the players historically to gain that leverage. There's not much you can do when, the choice is the NFL, the CFL, or essentially nothing. And with the XFL gone, right, that limits just another one of the few bargaining chips really, that CFL players had. And so I can certainly see that potentially making an impact when the next round of negotiations come about.
Let's say hypothetically, Hodge, it happened and you were put in a general manager's chair. Who would you go after first? And considering the salary cap, how much would you pay that player and you got to think that you have to build a team around them as well.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to go way off the board here. I'm paying Brandon Revenberg, offensive guard for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I know everyone else is saying Bo Levi Mitchell, but I don't build my team around a young quarterback. I'm building my young team around the best young offensive lineman, Canadian offensive lineman in the CFL, in Brandon Revenberg, paying him a handsome $225K.
But Haji, there's plenty of Canadian offensive linemen out there. You could argue that franchise quarterbacks are few and far between.
They are, but I'm not going to get into a bidding war for one of the top quarterbacks. I'm going to go the same route as the Grey Cup champion Winnipeg Blue Bombers and many teams, whether it's CFL or NFL. I'm going to find myself a quarterback in the middle of the pay scale. If I'm getting early to the bidding table, I'm not going to the quarterback spot. I'm building up my Canadian talent, especially along the offensive line, though I admit I might be a little bit biased in that respect.
Then perhaps you're looking at a guy like Cody Fajardo, who is sort of in that next tier in terms of compensation at the quarterback position?
Absolutely. I'll take Cody Fajardo behind a great offensive line any day. You needn't look further than the 2019 BC Lions to see what an all-star quarterback looks like when the protection is a little bit suspect at times.
I'm with you, Haji. I think you need to make sure that you keep your quarterback upright, but if it's one player, I gotta go to that position. I might not want to get in a bidding war, but I would have to sign Bo Levi Mitchell. The guy has 2 MOPs, has 2 Grey Cup championships, and he's done it in a receiving core that's ever changing. And overall, the offensive line has been above average there, I should say, really solid in Calgary. But Bo Levi Mitchell just knows how to get it done in the clutch. Bo knows time and time again. We've seen it, except for last year when Saskatchewan took top spot in the West. You just assumed Calgary was going to be there, and they still had a shot at it, even though he missed 7 games with the shoulder injury. So I would have to take Mitchell and just maybe hope that that price doesn't inch over $1 million. Because if you remember, Haji, when Mitchell almost made it to free agency, the Argos were going to nearly almost throw that much money at him.
I'll tell you what, while you and 7 other GMs are all fighting over Bo Levi Mitchell and almost all of you coming away empty-handed, I'm already going to have the best offensive line in the country inked. So I'll see you at the bottom of the standings while we're celebrating a Grey Cup with the best rushing attack in the country.
It's just a crazy scenario to think of, but a fun one in times where there's not many sports going on. Hodge, the one event that will actually happen, I should say 2, the NFL draft and the CFL draft, scheduled to continue and go as planned. Let's first touch on the NFL draft because there are 2 top tier, and we're talking elite prospects at their respective positions that are looking to hear their name called early in the NFL draft. When do you think Chase Claypool, the receiver out of Notre Dame, or Neville Gallimore, the defensive tackle out of Oklahoma, could hear their names called at the NFL draft?
By all accounts, I think Chase Claypool out of Abbotsford, BC, should be a first-round draft pick when it comes time for the NFL draft to take place in a little under a week. Claypool is a freak athlete at 6'4", 238 pounds. The guy can run the 40-yard dash in 4.45. I mean, the guy is putting up crazy testing numbers across the board. He was already climbing in terms of his stock before the combine as he looked to potentially make the move from wide out to tight end. But once he got to that event and blew things away, not only in the 40-yard dash, but in the strength drills, the quickness drills, he looks the part, and he's the perfect fit for the modern NFL game. It's not the 1990s anymore. Tight ends are expected to do a whole heck of a lot more than block. And Chase Claypool, though that side of his game is maybe not as well developed as you'd want, just the ceiling that he has to be an impact pass catcher from that position. A guy who was his MVP at Notre Dame with the Fighting Irish this past season, looked great at the Senior Bowl, catching a touchdown pass. I don't see any way that he slides out of the first round. If he does, a team is going to get a heck of a day 2 selection in Claypool. Speaking of day 2, that's where I see Neville Gallimore of Ottawa, Ontario. Gallimore, for a 300-pounder, moves unbelievably well. The NFL game is a little different than the CFL game. I know in Canada, teams are always looking for big men who can move. In the NFL, though, still obviously a big part of the attraction for prospects along the line. And if you're looking for a guy at 6'2", 300 pounds who can not only stuff the run, but also get after the passer and really move those big old feet, Neville Gallimore is a great pick. He is a crazy freak athlete for his size. I've been watching his tape for a couple of years now at Oklahoma. And I think he could get into the second round. If not, I think he'll be a steal for sure for an NFL team if he falls to round 3.
I'm right with you, Haji, on both players. I just don't understand how Chase Claypool doesn't go in the first round with his unique combination of size, speed, and skill, and the fact that, as you said, you can line him up at tight end, but he's just as fast, if not faster, than a lot of the receivers that play in the NFL too. A dynamic offensive weapon. I just think of what he would be like, let's say, with the New Orleans Saints and Sean Payton, and how they've been so creative with Taysom Hill, and that sort of drawn some comparisons to Chris Streveler and what he might be able to do in the NFL. But Claypool just seems like such a dynamic talent. The numbers he put up with the combine really put him on the map, but he probably should have been there earlier. And Gallimore as well. You wonder if maybe he has a chance to slide into the first round, but as you said, probably makes sense that he goes more in that day 2 range, maybe round 2 or round 3. Both, no doubt, special prospects. And we have one at the top of the draft board in the CFL, my man crush, Jordan Williams. I feel like right now is the favorite to go number 1 overall in the 2020 CFL draft. Hodge, do you feel like that's right, or who's your guy to go off the board right now, number 1?
I think Williams makes a lot of sense because the NFL has already come and gone for Jordan Williams. Jordan Williams out of East Carolina hasn't played since 2017. It was only discovered last year during the football season at a free agent camp with the Ottawa Red Blacks, of all places, that it became known that Williams' mother was born in Canada and he was eligible to qualify as a national in the CFL. But his NFL days are done. He had a tryout with the San Francisco 49ers in 2018, didn't make the club. And I think the only reason, it's nothing to do with talent. The guy's 5'11", and you only have to ask Adam Bighill how many NFL teams want linebackers who are 5'11", even if they've got all the athleticism and talent in the world. Williams is a potential guy, I also think, who can come in and start right away for a team that had a Canadian starter at linebacker last year in Corey Greenwood, who with injuries and age hasn't been back there yet. I will still say, though, I don't know how you pass up arguably the best U Sports offensive lineman of the last 5 years in Carter O'Donnell, if you are the Calgary Stampeders. The Stamps have done a lot to enhance their depth along the offensive line. Sean McEwen, the former All-Star center coming over from Toronto, signing with his hometown team, a former member of the Dinos. But I just think the kid's from Red Deer. He played at Alberta. You have a chance as the Stampeders to steal him away from Edmonton and potentially have him for a 10-year Hall of Fame career. I think Williams would be a great pick at 1. I just think it's tough. If you're the Stamps, you got an absolute blue chip offensive lineman in your backyard. Man, it's tough to pass that up.
The tricky choice with O'Donnell, though, is has he signed an NFL contract? Or there's some people that feel like maybe he goes in the back end of the draft. Scouts are talking about, NFL ones that is, that O'Donnell is further along coming out than Laurent Duvernay-Tardif was. Now, Duvernay-Tardif has certainly carved out a unique path. We know his story with going through as being a doctor as well at McGill University while winning the Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. It's just remarkable what he's accomplished in his life already. But it's tough to say and project how players are going to be at the NFL level. So that's why I have Williams going off the board at number 1, because I feel like at least O'Donnell's going to sign a contract and be going to a training camp with an NFL team. That seems very realistic. Scouts are impressed with the way he moves. If he would have had a pro day, he might have been bordering on or close to a double-digit amount of NFL teams there. Think about that. Coming up to Edmonton, Alberta to see the guy at his pro day. We're talking about other guys that had double digits. David Onyemata had 16 teams, I believe. Anthony Auclair at Laval had over 10 as well. I believe that was 11 or 12. So it sort of gives you an idea as to the legitimate NFL interest in O'Donnell. So I think if he doesn't go in the later rounds, he's a surefire UDFA, which drops him down the CFL board. Haji, we talk a lot about the top guys on the board, and obviously Williams and O'Donnell, for me, are in a tier of their own when it comes to the CFL draft. But who are some of your top guys at the other positions or other players that we just haven't talked about yet?
One guy who I don't think is getting enough of attention is Stavros Katsantonis, whose name I'm hoping I say correctly, out of UBC. He was a player who tested positive for a performance-enhancing substance after last year's combine took place in March of 2019. He's a guy who's been out of football for a year, but I think is one of the best playmakers in the draft. He's only 5'8", and when you combine that with his history from last year, I don't see him going in the first 3 rounds of the draft. But I think when he goes, you're going to get a guy who can make plays at safety and be great on special teams. I've heard him compared to Jeff Hecht a little bit as an undersized Canadian DB, but as a better athlete and a more explosive playmaker. Another guy who I'm looking for, who I've recently really enjoyed watching, is Jacob Zott, offensive lineman out of McMaster. He's got quick feet. I think he probably makes most sense as a center. He played guard at McMaster. Cody Speller, now at the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, occupying the Marauders center spot for most of Zott's time with that team. But if you put him in the center, I think that he could be a really effective CFL player and a guy who you don't have to pick in the top rounds of the draft. I think a guy who can slide possibly into round 3 or even 4.
One of my favorite guys in the draft, Haji, is Dejon Brissett, the receiver that had a number of stellar years at Richmond University, was on top of the receiving charts there in the FCS, I believe, Bowl subdivision, then ends up at the University of Virginia, suits up in the ACC Conference Championship game against Clemson. There are not too many players in this draft that have played on that kind of stage. And oh, by the way, he's got the genes too. His brother, O'Shea Brissett, plays for the Toronto Raptors and Team Canada basketball too. So that's a guy that I believe has flown under the radar a little bit. Yes, he had some injury issues that held him back from his full potential while he was with the Cavaliers just for that one season in 2019. But he's a guy to me that you look at the pedigree at the NCAA level, proven, productive, and there aren't too many guys who can say they played at a Power 5 school and, as I said, an ACC Conference Championship game against one of the top programs going right now in college football in Clemson. So for me, that's one guy that I'm ultra curious to see. I interviewed him and he told me, it'd be pretty cool to come back to Toronto and play in the same city where his brother plays with the Raptors. He'd obviously be with the Argos and under that MLSE umbrella. But you never know with the draft shoot, man. It is such a crapshoot. Are there any other guys, Haji, that you want to get in before we sign off?
Well, we're going to save a lot of those names for our draft pod that we'll be doing before April 30th. But I will say, you mentioned Brissett. There's a lot of guys in this year's draft that I think, even more so than most years, where, it's tough to project whether you want to talk about a guy like Brendan O'Leary-Orange, massive target out of Nevada. You want to talk about Andrew Becker, who I think is a really good interior blocker with the Regina Rams. Guys who just fought injuries, guys who maybe haven't played in a year or two. Matt McConnell, as an off-the-board name from St. Mary's, hasn't played in 2 years due to a doping violation, but he's a DB the size of Taylor Loeffler, 6'3", 220 pounds, and he runs and jumps exceptionally well. So the CFL draft, I completely agree, is a tough one to predict any year. But if there was ever a year where it was ultra tough, no combines, no pro days, and a half dozen easily guys who haven't played in the last year or two, or maybe haven't played as effectively due to injuries, it's going to be a wild one on April 30th. And I encourage all of our viewers to keep up on 3DownNation as we continue to profile prospects and project how things are going to play out on draft day.
It could go all over the board, off the board, but Haji, thanks for jumping on board with us today, sharing that knowledge. And as you mentioned, we'll have tons of content on 3DownNation, podcasts, profiles, up to date with the latest news and goods. But you got to make sure, hit that subscribe button. We're going to try to do some more YouTube content as well to keep you guys updated during the COVID-19 pandemic.